Guys, welcome to today's video where we're going to be ranking my wash plants out of 10 from worst to best. Now, the categories are cost, function, their looks, and how unique they are. So out of these four categories, it'll be average, of course, out of 10. And so at number 11, at last place, we have the Gladiators and the lower bench cut. These were the fourth plants that I built. Fourth and fifth, I guess, if you want to call it that. They look very nice, but they don't really function all that well. On a cost scale, they were 5.5 million for the both of them, which for how many systems there are isn't that bad, but it's pretty expensive for how dysfunctional they are. So I'm giving that like a 2.5 out of 10, I think. Their function is also very weak. I'm gonna have to give this like a 4 out of 10. Mostly because they're 9 systems, which for a rock truck you really only need 8 at most. So it's a bit too many on each of them. And plus the way that they're orientated, I hadn't come up with the quick deposit system. I hadn't incorporated that yet. So you had to back up to them. So that's why the function on these is going to score really low. Looks wise though, I think these look very nice actually. I don't think they're the best looking ones I have, but I think the minimalistic single wing looks really nice with a little bit of support, a little bit of inspection in all place. So I think I'm going to give that a 5 out of 10. And for their uniqueness, I mean, they're kind of unique in that they're split in two, but like, I mean, there isn't really much else going on about it. I mean, the uniqueness kind of actually takes away from the function of them. So I think we're going to have to score that pretty low at a 3. So let's move on to the next... So let's move on to the next plant. So now at number 10 we're gonna have the solo plant. Now this was very functional, but for the looks it's gonna score really low. This is why it's so low on the list. So I think for cost, I think it was around 500,000 or 600,000. So I'm gonna have to give cost like an 8 out of 10. It was phenomenal turnaround. Like I said, 500,000 or 600,000. I think I turned out like 11 million profit. Function, it functioned extremely well. That was the whole point of the solar plant. So I'm gonna have to give that like an 8.5 out of 10. It looks really shitty. I gotta admit, I'm gonna have to give that like half a point, honestly. And then uniqueness, it's pretty unique, but a lot of people use direct hopper, direct line dumping system, so it's not really that unique. I'm gonna have to give that a 3 out of 10. That's why it's going to score so lowly overall, because of the fact that it just isn't that unique and it doesn't really look that good, but it did function very, very well. So that's going to be number 10 on our list. Number 9 on our list is what I'm officially dubbing Tulip, the unionized loader industry plant is what I'm calling it. Otherwise known as loader plant in all the other videos. Now, it does score really low just because of its effectiveness, essentially. It cost a lot, honestly, for the platform and for the super stack and everything, so I'm going to have to give that like a 2.5 out of 10. Its function is very dysfunctional. It's a 3 system that, as you can see, we were packing full of loaders and would often get very backed up, so I'm going to have to give its function like a 1. Looks though, it looks extremely nice. We did a phenomenal job with the details on it, and it accomplished what it was meant to do. So looks, I'm going to have to give it like a 9 out of 10. And then for its uniqueness, I'm also going to give it a 9 out of 10. We used some other methods for building the plant, some water features and stuff on it. So uniqueness, I'm going to give that a 9 as well, because there isn't really any other plants that I've built like this or that I've seen built like this. So overall, it scores pretty mid-tier, bottom mid-tier that is. But that's just because of its cost and functionality of the plant. It wasn't really that great, but it wasn't really meant to be that good. So it did accomplish what we needed. So now this is when the rankings get tight. At number 8 we have Rocking Red, which was actually tied with Tulip on the ranking scale. Rocking Red trumps Tulip though, due to seniority of course. So at number 8 we have Rocking Red. Now, the cost of this plant was actually pretty cheap. I think it was somewhere a bit over the 1 million mark. So that's going to get probably a 7 out of 10, honestly. Its functionality, it's pretty bad. a single rock truck can dump into it that has to reverse into it. It was more so meant for dual loader dumping. It wasn't really meant for single or double rock truck dumping. So for function, it's going to get like a 5 out of 10. Now for the looks, I think Rocking Red is one of my better looking plants. There is one or two that I've made better since that rank higher than it on the looks department. But for this plant, for this being the third plant that I built, I think it came out really, really nice. So for the looks scale, I think it deserves a 6.5 out of 10. For the uniqueness, it's not very unique. A lot of people come to the same conclusion when they're designing their plants, just because it's really simple and it looks nice and everything. So uniqueness, we're gonna have to give that 3 out of 10, which is why it's so low on the list still. But overall, a really nice plant and a close tie with Tulip. So very, very close. I mean, it was literally exact, so can't really get much closer than that. So let's move on to number 7. So at number 7, this is another plant that I'm officially naming. It was unnamed for the longest time. I am naming this Moon, just because it's kind of like gray like the moon and then blue like the moonstones. So I think Moon is pretty fitting for it. So Moon scores pretty decently overall. Its cost was a bit higher because we implemented the quick deposit system where the trucks can just roll on and off of the plant. So it's a little bit higher than usual. So the cost, I think I'm going to have to give it like a 5 out of 10. The function though is very nice because we did do that. So I'm going to have to give that like a 7 out of 10. The looks on this plant, it looks really nice, but it is like really wide because we had to put on the quick deposit system. It's causing like a lot of pros and cons on this plant. So for looks, I mean, we tried to do like the tribal tats kind of like on fighter jets and stuff on it, and it came out half decent, but I mean, it still just looks really clunky and just big. So I think for a look scale, we're gonna have to give this like 5.5 out of 10. And for uniqueness, I mean, again, it's not that unique. It's just a bigger Rocking Red, but with the quick deposit system on it. So it's a little more unique, but it's still the same principle. So for uniqueness, we're going to have to give it like a 4.5 out of 10. A little bit better than Rocking Red, but overall not that unique per se. It did come out really nice and it functions really good. So on to number 6. Okay, so moving on to number 6 on the list, we have the second plant that I made, Big Blue. Now, Big Blue is going to score pretty decently in the first half and not so great in the second half here. So cost, it's almost $500,000 flat. I think it's like 498 and then a few more digits. So it's pretty much $500,000 flat, which is actually really decent. So the cost is going to be like an 8 out of 10 on it. The function, it's really bad honestly. It only runs pay dirt. It's only meant for loaders, so it functions not great, honestly. We're gonna have to give that like a 4.5 out of 10. The looks on it, I think it looks half decent. First started putting the inspection pads on it too, which came out really nice. So I think for a look scale, we're looking at around a 6 on it. And for its uniqueness, again, it's a single wing. It was my first like real big design, so it's not very unique at all. I think we're gonna have to stick with a 4 out of 10 on that. But for its overall, it performs really well. It's just that really it's the functionality that kind of kills it. Just because if it were able to run more than just pay dirt, if it could use a dump truck, then it'd be better. But overall, it's not that bad, and certainly a still good plant. So we're finally into the top 5, with number 5 being the well worn out Zeus. Zeus is one of my favorites, honestly, one of my personal favorites, just because I solo ran this plant for so long on this upper bench cut. So it's really personal to me. It's essentially a Moon without the quick deposit system, but this one was made first, obviously. So on the rating scale, the cost, it's cheaper than Moon, more expensive than Rocking Red, so it's going to be around a 6 out of 10, honestly. Its function, it functioned really well for the time, and it could actually support, I think, 2 trucks dumping at once. 3 was a bit tricky, so it actually functioned really well. It's just that they couldn't drive over it, they had to back up to it. So for function, we're going to have to stick with like a 6.5 out of 10. For the looks, I think this plant looks amazing. The reason why it's called Zeus is because this mine that we're on right now is Mount Olympus, and Zeus sits atop Mount Olympus. So I think for a look scale, it looks really good. I'm gonna have to give it a 7 out of 10. For the uniqueness of it, again, it's just a simple wing system. It's not very unique, it's not very special. So it's gonna get like a 4 out of 10, but still squeezes by into the top 5. You can see how it's well worn, how we've had to replace parts on it that have just, I don't know. I honestly don't even remember the story on why those have been picked up and not been repainted. Couldn't tell you, but it's been well worn. It's pulled out probably around 500 million out of the ground, so it well deserves to be in the top 5. Number 4 is the Hydra. We'll do quick and simple with it, honestly. Cost, it was really expensive. It's like a 1.5. Function really well. Storage boxes ended up inside of it, so it's like an 8 out of 10 on that. Looks, it ended up coming out amazing. That's gonna be like an 8.5 out of 10, honestly. It's really unique too, since we hadn't done any large scale plants like this, so it's gonna be like a 7 out of 10, which puts it into the number 4 slot. We have done big plants kind of like it, but nothing where the storage boxes will end up inside of the refinery. First one in the top 3 is the 4 Horsemen at number 3. This is another one of my personal favorites, honestly, just because of how overkill it is and how nice the surrounding area came out. We gotta do some tree trimming around here, just haven't gotten around to it, really been too busy mining. But this is just a beautiful plant, or plants, I don't really know what you'd want to say. The cost though, it's actually not too bad. I can't remember the exact value. I think it was somewhere around the 12 to 15 million mark, which honestly wasn't terrible. These micro plants are really good. So for the cost side of things, it's going to be like a 5.5 out of 10. It's really expensive, but when you put to scale, we have 4 8 systems, so it's 32 systems. And each one is actually a little bit different than the last. It wasn't really intentional. It was just more so to fit the surrounding area. As you can see, the one on the end, it has the storage boxes turn in directly rather than interlocking, which I hadn't done before, and it didn't really come out that great. Which is why we have them turned in on themselves, so it can have the gap in it. This one's a little bit lower and a little bit shorter for some reason. This one sticks out a little bit longer, and that one sticks out even a little bit more. I can't exactly remember why. This one also gets raised, that one doesn't get raised, that one doesn't. It's all a little bit different from each one to the next, which I really like about the plants. Function wise, I mean, look at it, it's absolutely amazing. It's going to be feeding multiple different cuts. We've been using it for the ocean cut so far. We got 3 strips on it so far. It's used on the ocean cut. It's used on a cut down there if we put one in. It's used on the dead end cut. It's used on this unfinished cut, and it's used on this unnamed cut. That's what makes it so nice, is it has 4 deposit pads for cuts that are decently far away from one another. So that way it's kind of centered around it all. So for a function wise on the plant, it's going to score really well with like a 7 out of 10. The looks, I think these plants look amazing. I don't think they look the best that we've had, but I do think that they look amazing. So I think I'm going to have to give it like an 8 out of 10. The water reserve came out really well on it. We were going to make it kind of like a dam with water flowing out the other side, but we shut down the mine before we got around to it. But just the individuality between each plant and them just not being copy and pasted, I really like, which is why it scores really high in the looks department. Uniqueness, it is pretty unique, like I just said. Each one is different from one another, but this is also just kind of a remake after I mastered the interlocking system. You'll see on the next plant how I originally started with it, and then you'll see on the number 1 plant how I mastered it. So I think on a uniqueness, we're going to have to give it like a 7 out of 10. Just because it is kind of a copy of something I had already done, but changed up a little bit for each one. So it does squeeze into the top 3 by just a little bit. It's a high. At number 2, this one's going to be pretty controversial, I think. We have the plants Michael and Lucifer. These were the first iterations of the interlocking system. I had done the proof of concept plant, but this was the first large-scale versions of them. This is why it's going to be really controversial, because some things score really low, others really high. So let's just get into it really. So from a cost point, these things were way over budget. I think I spent like 24 million on these two plants, which they're 32 systems together. So it's almost twice as much as the 4 horsemen, essentially. So I went way over budget with them, but they do look pretty nice. But for a cost standpoint, it's going to be like a 3 out of 10, honestly. They're just way too expensive. Like I said, first iterations, didn't fully know what I was doing with them yet on a large scale. Function-wise, they do function extremely well. The whole point of the interlocking system was I don't really like putting my storage boxes directly into refineries. I like trucking it over there. So I like to have my storage boxes with the plant, which is the point of the wing system, but I wanted them more centered. So by having more centered storage boxes, I'm able to access them a little easier, and they end up in a really nice spot in the middle. I made some huge mistakes on this plant though, which is probably why the budget overshot and why these storage boxes are raised and then crossed a second time, which is kind of weird. Don't really know how I managed it. I just kind of kept on building, but from a function standpoint, did really well. Probably around an 8 out of 10 on them. And then obviously on Michael, I fixed a couple of things on them, so that way they did work as I originally intended. That's why those storage boxes are sunk down in and not raised and all crisscross. I gotta say though, from a look scale, Lucifer turned out amazing. I actually really like the storage boxes going across like that. It just ate up a lot more space and a lot more conveyors that weren't needed. So from a look scale, this is where it's going to get controversial. A lot of people like them. I've gotten positive feedback from them. A lot of people think that they're just overkill waste. Yes, these were overkill, but I was trying out a new design, which is why the number 1 is number 1. But from a look scale, I think they look amazing. I think they kind of look like an Aztec temple kind of thing. So from a look standpoint, I'm honestly going to give these a 9 out of 10. Say what you will in the comments, but a lot of people I've heard really positive feedback from these as well. Uniqueness, these are extremely unique, especially Lucifer, who I fucked up on these storage boxes, so they are pretty unique. I am really mad I had to nuke the areas around. That's another reason why I had to do another version of them to compact everything. So uniqueness, it's going to be like an 8.5 out of 10, I think. So that'll solidify all the way up to number 2. And finally, at the number 1 spot, we have Thunder and Lightning. Although Michael and Lucifer might be controversial, I cannot say the same about these two. Every single person I've seen all the plants agrees that this is their favorite. Here is Thunder and Lightning. Now, this is essentially one of Michael and Lucifer split into 2 different halves, 2 different depositing spots. So essentially, I wanted to make it more compact and cheaper, which I actually did really well on the second attempt. Instead of having one big one, I realized that by doing so, the conveyors have to get longer and longer by each stage when I balance them. So if I just split it into 2 different halves, then I can just have less balancing to do. So there's less conveyors altogether, which is why I'm able to compact them down so much. So these are essentially just one of Michael or Lucifer. It's not both. That's kind of what the 4 horsemen is. This is just one of them. And everyone agrees that these are probably their favorite plants that they've seen on here. And I concur, which is why it's at the number 1 spot. From a cost standpoint, I believe it was somewhere around 10 to 12 million, including the concrete and metal pad that the rock trucks use to dump. So it actually was really, really cheap to make these. So that's why it's going to score so well on the cost standpoint. The function of them extremely well. The only difference, or the only thing that I don't really like, is the ramps. The ramps weren't put in all that great. Should have been really long with the cut instead of cutting in. But I mean, that isn't the plant. So the plant's function actually functioned very well. So it's going to score an 8 out of 10. We did have a fuck up on the cell points. A couple of them were too deep into the ground, which is why there's a couple of uncolored spots of raised conveyors. We had to raise them up a little bit. Looks is going to top tier everyone here because it looks amazing. Like I've been saying, people say that this is their favorite that they've seen on here. So looks 9.5 out of 10 easily. Uniqueness also going to score really well because this is the compact version of the interlocking, which was really hard to come up with over time. I actually really compacted, I always forget about this, I really compacted it down by putting my trommel sorters underneath the interlocking part, so you don't actually see it on the top lines, you see it on the bottom lines after it crosses through one another, which would really helps with downsizing these plants. So uniqueness, 8.5 out of 10, easily. Could easily score higher, honestly, but I still haven't made, in my opinion, my most unique plant yet. I mean, obviously, because this is an iteration of another plant, but overall, this is by far my favorite plant. It's ran material just fine, just sub point was the problem. The storage, really easy access. That's probably the only gripe with these plants, is that because they're two different halves, the storages aren't together like on Michael or Lucifer, but they are still really easy to access all at once. So overall, best plant in my opinion that I have made will be the Thunder and Lightning plant. Hopefully I'll be able to top it at some point. I don't really know what design I'll have to come up with really. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and make sure to like and subscribe.